Checkout tracking by the NPD Group brings you a receipt collecting system that gathers data anonymously through technology we created, providing your businesses with answers.
We're talking about is the power of community, which is a little bit different than I think some people talk about community. Let's see. All right, so I want to cover what does community mean, how does community fuel growth. I want to talk about our strategy for building community, which is oriented around licenses, and then give you some actual ideas that you can act upon and use within your own game. Okay, so who are we and why should you care about anything I have to say? Well, we've got a game out there called Game of Thrones Ascent today. It's had over 10 million installs. It's done well economically. It's done well qualitatively. It's gotten good ratings, and it's been out there for 30 months, and it's maintained an audience that consists of people who have stuck with the product from the day it launched. So it's a real success story around retaining an audience and engaging them long term. The other product we're working on is called Star Trek Timelines, and this is another game which has a massive fan base behind it. So just a quick poll, who is here as a Game of Thrones fan? Raise your hand. Okay. Star Trek, anyone? Okay. Rest of you, you're dead to me. Or I shouldn't say that, please stay in the room, it'll crush me. All right. Let me start with what community isn't. So this is the way the term tends to be used in the industry. This is actually not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about your forum or your customer support system or your social media channels or the way you do blog posts and comments. Basically, whatever it is that a community manager does in your company is actually not what I'm talking about when I refer to community. I think that they do an important function as part of an overall strategy, and it's the strategy that I want to talk to. The problem in the industry is growth. You heard that several times today. You listened to that at a couple of presentations ago, the challenge and the increasing costs of customer acquisition. But growth is really several layers of the funnel. So there's awareness at the top, acquisition, activation, retention, revenue, referral, and I'll define what those things are. That's the problem that we're trying to solve, and it's my view that community can be a problem, it can be a solution for all of that. But just to kind of briefly run through what exactly I'm talking about here, start with awareness. So awareness is just what do people know about you before they even click on an ad or come and install your game. Everything they do before they really start any kind of real interaction with your company. This is typically solved through things like PR, social media, if you're really highly scaled, things like television ads and so forth. Acquisition. So acquisition is about app store optimization, direct marketing, all the things that get people to actually click on a opportunity to install. What's the problem with that? You heard this multiple times today, but this is the problem. The cost of doing direct marketing is really super expensive. So it runs $2 to $3 per user to get someone to install, and this is, on mobile, on Facebook, it's actually not much less than that these days. It's just really, really expensive to build a business purely around paid user acquisition. Third layer of the funnel, activation. So you get them playing, but you got to get them understanding what the game is all about. We define activation at our company as returning the next day. So some people think of that as D1 retention. We think of activation really as getting through the tutorial and then coming back the next day. And if you haven't done that, we haven't activated you. Retention, are they really sticking around? So D1 retention, in my view, is almost a misnomer. Returning only 24 hours later, that is not retention. Real retention is a week, 2 weeks, a month, a year later is what retention is. We are particularly focused on 30-day retention in our company. Revenue, generating revenue, referral, do people bring people back to your company? So community, in my view, isn't those things I mentioned earlier. It's really creating the ecosystem for your company that addresses all these aspects of the funnel. And what I want to share with you is some strategies and approaches that we have used at Disruptor Beam to try to tweak some of the metrics at every layer of the funnel using community-driven approaches as a strategy for the company, something that isn't just forum management or social media management, but is actually baked into the products and the philosophy of the company. One question, though, is why now? So that's sort of the graph of the technology S-curve. It's what's talked about in the innovator's dilemma. Refers to the idea that, you know, incumbents ultimately sort of level out in a market and other people innovate and vastly exceed them. But why does that happen? It's usually because of some kind of seismic shift in the market that makes products available to a wider group of consumers than had previously been able to access them at all. And I think that with mobile, we're not looking at just a new technology platform, we're looking at a lifestyle change with respect to games. Games are now accessible to people not just because of the tech, but because it adapts to their lifestyle, because this is an audience of people who won't sit down for 3 or 4 hours in front of a console. Right now, the numbers are 7 billion mobile subscriptions in the world, so it's clear that it's pervasive and it's available to everyone. But really, it comes down to the fact that there's a cultural change, and it's really people-powered. A phone is a relationship device. It's principally a communication device. It's for relating to other people. So being able to play games on it is another way to use it as a relationship driver. And I think that's sort of the missing ingredient for quite a few games out there. Many of the top games on the app stores are ones that I think have directly recognized that and are incorporating relationships and social stuff and community into their game products. So I'm going to tell you the way we approach community and the way it relates to licensing. Licensing itself is a strategy, and there's really 2 ways to approach this. So I think that most companies who approach licensed games think of it as they have mastered a particular type of game system, and they need to then adapt that game system with IP with the intention of lowering customer acquisition costs. And indeed, brands do and licenses do tend to decrease customer acquisition costs because anything that's recognizable to people, there's a much greater willingness to try it. The problem with that approach is that while that tends to do a great job of optimizing the eCPI, the cost of customer acquisition, it frequently does not optimize for long-term value and long-term engagement of your customers. And that's why we think that there's another emergent category around licensing that we certainly aspire to lead the way in, which is really starting to think about what is the essence of the intellectual property, what is it really at its core, and then building the game that's right for it, which may often mean building new game systems and things that haven't been tried before. To me, it's about authenticity. It's about finding what do people care about and then building the game system that matters. So, for example, in Game of Thrones Ascent, we realized that George R.R. Martin's vision was really about bringing to life the diplomacy and the politics of that world. So it wouldn't be a fighting game. It wouldn't be about a Clash of Clans clone. It wouldn't be about any number of other games that are already prolific on the App Store. We really wanted to take the politics and make that the driving force in the game. So therefore, alliances and storytelling and backstabbing and marriage agreements and things like that would be important in the game. Star Trek Timelines, we've also gone back to the source material and tried to think about what do people really care about. And they care about the optimism of the universe. They care about the characters a lot. And they care about the idea of exploration and solving problems in ways that aren't limited simply to who can kill another person within the world. So again, to bring that to life in a mobile game required us to think about new methods of storytelling and new types of character development that could work within the Star Trek model. So I'm going to take you through a few different things that we think about at different layers of that funnel and the way it's led us to do different things in marketing and product development. So just to give you a little background on Star Trek in particular, this is now a 50-year franchise. Hopefully that doesn't make some people in the room feel too old, but it actually turns 50 years old in next year. But it's just as alive as ever. It has a new movie coming out next year. CBS is doing events all over the place. There's huge numbers of fans out there, hundreds of millions of people who are familiar with Star Trek, and we have the honor and pleasure of being able to work on this product. An aspect of Star Trek and something that we're taking advantage of because of the license is the love that the people have for the characters, the fans have for the characters. So one of the opportunities we identified is that there's this huge number of people out there that are actually members of the cast. So we're working with John Delancey, who played the character Q, important recurring character within Star Trek The Next Generation, Voyager, and Deep Space Nine. And we're now working with him, and we put him in the game. So he's voicing over new content, and he's helping us with marketing. So he's appearing in videos, and we've appeared on stage with him. He's helping us present this to the audience of Star Trek consumers. Events have been an important part of this, and I think this is different than what most mobile game companies are doing. You're seeing a picture there of when we were at Penny Arcade Expo just a few months back in March. We were probably only one of 2 or 3 mobile game companies that were even at Penny Arcade Expo, but it was a really unique opportunity to engage with fans, and we actually were able to collect 1,700 user tests in the course of doing the convention at Penny Arcade Expo. If we had been an unknown game, it would have been harder to bring people into the booth. But also, the thing I want to point out here is that this is a part of the overarching community strategy. It isn't just about being there to market to people, because if it was purely a marketing exercise, no way would have been being at Penny Arcade Expo have been worthwhile. But in terms of getting direct feedback and being able to encounter fans and be able to get feedback to game features well before a soft launch or a closed beta or anything like that, it was sort of an invaluable opportunity to do that. And some of the quotes that we got in blogs and online are reflected by reflect the idea that people really saw that we had this love for the intellectual property, and we were fans ourselves, which is part of why fans are starting to embrace this game. That's also reflected in this Facebook comment here. This is just from the other day. I pulled it off, but this person said that the thing I love most about this is that Star Trek Timeline guys are actual fans rather than just being paid to make their games. So I guess our marketing is starting to work because people are believing what we're saying, but I think it's because it's actually true. We actually really care about it. In fact, we select for people in the company based on the fact that they really like the IP. So an important cultural decision we made, going back again to community as a strategy, not just sort of a function in your company, was that when we hire people, we're always asking them, do you like Game of Thrones or Star Trek? And if you don't like either of those, you're not going to get hired by our company, and that's now true for 47 people that are in the company. And it really makes a difference because it means that we bring that passion to the product development effort, and people are that much more invested in it when they know that they're doing something that they themselves want to play. Going back to Game of Thrones Ascent for a moment, another aspect of I think our success here has been the proliferation of Facebook groups and social media groups around the game. So there are hundreds, really countless, because we can't even find them all. And these aren't huge groups. They're groups of dozens to, in some case, a few thousand people. And they're talking about different subjects. So this is one I just grabbed a screenshot of earlier today. This is the Go to Dragons group. This is a group of people who really want to talk about dragon crafting in the game because dragons are really hard to create and aspirational. We didn't go and tell people to make these groups, but what we did is we made an environment in the game that gets people talking to each other, chatting with each other, forming alliances, and they themselves have gone out and created these additional groups. It's coupled with not only the social stuff, but really creating the hard, aspirational, deep content that takes a long time to get to so that there's a subject of conversation amongst these people. Another strategy that we've applied with Game of Thrones Ascent is the idea of using what's going on in the peripheral media and bringing that into the game rapidly. So this required us to build a content development pipeline in Game of Thrones Ascent that allows us to, in a few days or a couple of weeks' notice, add content to the game that we know is going to be important in the near future. So for example, there's this thing that happened in Game of Thrones called the Red Wedding. It was on an episode a couple of years ago. If you haven't seen it yet, because you're one of those people in the room who haven't watched Game of Thrones yet, I'm not going to tell you what happens, but it was bad, and people started talking about it. The point here is that the day that happened, or the day after that happened, we had content in the game that was relevant to this Red Wedding episode, and you can see how that played out in the stats. So our DAU increased by 23%. Right after that happened because there's a lot of search velocity around Game of Thrones Ascent at the time. Our installs went up a lot. So our install rate daily was up by 100%. And that's because not only were people, again, searching, but we were immediately relevant because we had the Red Wedding content in the game and they were searching and finding us as well. And this effect lasted for a couple of weeks. And all these new customers that we were getting during that time, they were monetizing double double or more relative to what our typical consumer did. So these were also the most highly engaged consumers. So I think anytime you can, doing this successfully requires that you do a couple things. One is you're listening and preparing for content and things that you know are coming in the market, but you've also developed your product development pipeline in such a way that you can actually incorporate content rapidly, which is often not that easy to do. One of the last things I'm going to cover is video, because I think this is one of the most important and emergent aspects of community. And frankly, it's something we didn't do a good job at with Game of Thrones Ascent, which is a game that is pretty text-based. It's got beautiful two-dimensional graphics, but it isn't particularly immersive. Watching someone play it is about as exciting as watching someone read a book, so you really can't get that involved in it directly. What we wanted to do with Star Trek Timelines is change that. So bring in the rich storytelling, the character-driven content and things that had worked for us very well in Game of Thrones Ascent, but couple that with a experience that truly was leading edge for mobile and did things that people had never seen before on mobile. Now, there's a couple of different, and I'll show you that in a moment, but there's a couple of approaches I think that are dominating video right now, streaming versus just stored or retrievable videos. And I think that depending on the type of game, either one of those or sometimes both of them can be a great strategy for you. Our view is that streaming is really great for games that are personality driven, have live events, have a high performance element to it, performance meaning stuff that's hard to do, like a MOBA where it's really highly skill-based and you want to watch skills in action as they're happening. And that isn't Star Trek Timelines, by the way. Star Trek Timelines is more of a thinking person's game. It's highly immersive, and it's the rules and decisions that you're contending with along the way. Where stored content, and I think Timelines fits into this, is effective, is visually engaging content where you want to know how someone did something. So anytime that it looks great, and there were decisions a person or a player was making along the way that you want to see how they solved a certain problem, that makes for a really great stored content, stored video ecosystem, because as people solve these problems and share them with their friends, that becomes the subject of conversation, and it also becomes the subject of their social status as well, because they were the ones who solved it. So I'm just going to show you a little bit of what we're doing in Star Trek Timelines, just to reveal a little bit of sort of how the technology for mobile is changing. And when we show this, sometimes people think they're looking at a console game, but in fact, this is video that will run on an iPhone or an Android device. I'll comment as we go through it to explain kind of our thinking behind gameplay and how it relates to community. Okay, so this is an opening cutscene from Star Trek Timelines. Again, runs on an iPhone. There's a little bit of storytelling here. One of the ideas we had is that we really wanted this content to be something people would want to share. And it's been a long time since people have seen a really great Star Trek gaming experience. And the fact that it's going to be exposed on millions and millions of mobile devices, we felt would be an opportunity to get this game content in front of other people. You're also seeing beloved characters. So Q, Kirk, all those characters are present, and they represent characters that people have enormous affinity for. The next part of this, though, is a component of the game. It's not the whole game, but we have a Starship Battles part of the game, which is really visually interesting. You see things blowing up, you see people competing with each other. But our combat system is based on collecting the characters.
Make it so.
So one aspect of this is that you're showing off what characters you happen to own as part of your collection. But also, each character has a unique ability that they can use within a Starship Battle situation. And sometimes a combination of these unique character abilities is what you need to be able to defeat an opponent. So the driving force behind our video strategy really came down all the way into the gameplay system, where we wanted to create something that people would love to watch, yet would also allow them to be able to share the subjects of, here's my collection, and here's how I solved problems. Last piece, just to go back to the user testing, and this is just from last week, so there was a Las Vegas convention on Star Trek. We were there, we were on stage in front of thousands of people showing what you just saw, and we also had a convention booth where we got over 500 user tests in during the course of the show. The really great thing about this time around was that we also adapted the demo we were giving in the middle of the convention. So it was a convention that lasted 5 days. On the third day, we actually dropped another version of the demo based on the early feedback we got at the first couple of days of the convention, and then we continued to collect more feedback based on the changes that people saw, as well as observations of how people were playing the game. So doing this required us to be in the community with people, talking to them, but it also meant that having an agile development practice within the company was so essential, because that's what actually allowed us to pivot and respond to the community in real time. And that was exciting to be able to bring both of those practices together. So that's what I've got today. Happy to answer any questions for you.
Yeah, it's the last one of the day, so we've definitely got time for a couple of questions. Anyone in the audience have one? I've definitely got, well, the one over there. I'll let Jason go first.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks, Jon. I mean, any thoughts for those not working with such celebrated IPs? I mean, how do you think you would be doing what you're doing if you didn't have Star Trek or Game of Thrones? It was just, dragons and swords or something.
Yep. Yeah. I think that it's hard. We, the first game company I started not based on licenses or our own original IP, in a time much further from now, back when social networks were called America Online. And yeah, it was hard. We had to claw our way through and get one customer at a time. But even looking back to then, there was a strong community element to the kind of games that I was creating back then. So I think any company can do it if you think of it as a strategy. And the way it manifested in that first company is that we ran events, we listened to customers, we practiced agile development and made changes all the time based on actual customer feedback, not just the numbers. Numbers are super important, by the way. Like, we look at metrics all the time, but we also think that metrics are also excellent for optimizing to local maxima rather than necessarily always looking at the big picture. And when we're listening to people, I don't want to make it sound like people tell us to change something and then we change it. It's more like we're listening to what they say, doing pattern recognition, and then thinking about like what are the overarching reasons why people are saying these things so that we can address it through design changes. So, I think that there's plenty of evidence in the crowdsourcing space that you can build communities early on with really unique product ideas. But you always need some kind of unfair advantage to succeed anywhere in the gaming business, because if there's any recurring theme from all of the talks I saw today, it was that, wow, this business is really super hard and brutally unforgiving on top of that. So you got to bring some kind of unfair advantage. Our unfair advantage is the licensed IP and a really talented team that knows how to build some of the stuff like the video content that you saw there. There's lots of talented teams out there, and I think that's probably one of the most important. And talented teams tend to know an initial set of fans, and those fans can multiply into a 10-time bigger fan base. I think that you have to map a lot of things together so that you organize it around community from the beginning. The ones who have been most successful with crowdsourcing, I think, are actually some of the best examples of that, because they had to embed community not only into their product development, but they even had to embed community into the fundraising process.
Okay, I'd like to ask a question. So you talked about hiring on the basis of affinity for these licenses. Does that in a way become a controlling influence on what you can work on going forward in terms of how you're going to pick other licenses? Because you said something like 47 people hired on the basis of love of Game of Thrones, love of Star Trek. I mean, do you then need to consider what your staff loves on your next project? Or can you be a bit more ruthless about it?
So it's framed as an or, not an and. So there was a point in time when only Game of Thrones mattered, and not every single person in the company loved Star Trek when we moved to Star Trek, but the right people did. I was one of them, so that counted for something. But we also saw it as a great commercial opportunity as well. So even the people that didn't initially have the love of Star Trek, and we're working on them and showing them old episodes and getting them into it, they at least saw the business logic behind it and the parallels with Game of Thrones. There's a third product that we have not announced yet, which is also being built. You know, not everybody who was in those first two groups loved this third one, but as we continue to grow, we're going to keep hiring people who love one of the current things that we're doing and organize the teams around that.
Well, if you'd like to put your hands together for Jon.
Thank you.